Did Colonel Tom Parker really want Elvis to end his big comeback TV special with a Christmas jingle? Why did a producer feel the need to keep a loaded gun on his mixing desk while working on one of Elvis's biggest hits? And how did a fight over a single word in Hound Dog almost derail a partnership that defined rock and roll? The story of Elvis Presley is often told as a simple rise and fall, but underneath the music there was a constant battle. It was a fight between an artist and his manager. A fight between creative freedom and commercial control. And many times that fight nearly smothered some of the most iconic songs ever recorded. This is the story of those near misses. Number 17 was a gun pulled during the making of Suspicious Minds. The producer Chips Moman had a firearm on his mixing console, but not for the reason you might think. It was a regular fixture in his studio. The real standoff was over something more valuable than personal safety money. Elvis Presley had not had a number one hit in 7 years. It was 1969. He had just resurrected his career with the '68 comeback special. Now he needed a hit record. It's badly. He walked into American Sound Studio in Memphis, a grimy, no-frills place run by Moman. It was a world away from the sterile RCA studios in Nashville and Hollywood, where Colonel Parker preferred him to work. Parker liked control, he liked predictable, American Sound was neither. The house band, the Memphis Boys, was a well-oiled machine of soul and rhythm and blues. They were the sound behind hits for Dusty Springfield and Neil Diamond. Elvis felt at home. He was back in his city singing the music he loved. Songwriter Mark James, who was also recording at the studio, played Elvis a song he'd written called Suspicious Minds. Elvis loved it immediately. He knew it was the one. They cut the track in the early morning hours after a long night of work. The energy was electric. Elvis poured everything he had into it. The result was a masterpiece, a powerful, paranoid, and passionate performance that would become one of his defining songs. And then the Colonel called. The deal was simple. The Colonel demanded a piece of the publishing rights for any song Elvis recorded. Usually, he asked for a third. This time, he wanted 50%. This was standard procedure for Parker. He had bullied songwriters for years. Lieber and Stoller, the geniuses behind Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock, had famously told him where to go. But many younger writers, desperate for an Elvis cut, gave in. The problem was, Mark James's song was already published by his own company. There was no 50% to give away. Chips Moman, a tough, independent producer, told the Colonel's people no, absolutely not. The deal was off. An argument erupted. Phone calls flew between Memphis, Nashville, and Las Vegas. Parker's representatives, Freddie Bienstock and Harry Jenkins of RCA, were in Memphis to oversee the sessions. They told Moman that without the publishing deal, Elvis could not record the song. Moman stood his ground. He had produced a hit record. He wasn't going to let some manager in a fancy suit ruin it over a greedy business deal. For days, the master tapes for Suspicious Minds and the other incredible songs from those sessions sat in a vault at American Sound. Parker had effectively frozen the project. He was willing to sacrifice a number one hit to prove a point about who was in charge. Elvis was stuck in the middle. He was furious. He had just recorded some of the best music of his life, and his manager was about to throw it all in the garbage. Finally, a compromise was reached, though it was a messy one. Moman agreed to give up the publishing rights to some of the other songs recorded in the sessions, but not Suspicious Minds. Parker, seeing that Moman wouldn't break and perhaps realizing how much Elvis wanted the song, reluctantly agreed. But the fight wasn't over. When the track was sent to be mixed for release, another problem arose. Moman had produced a song with a natural live ending. But RCA producer Felton Jarvis, who was loyal to Parker, took the tape and added a premature fade out around the 350 mark, followed by a fade in. Why? It was a signal. It was a way to make the song sound finished for radio DJs who were used to songs ending with a fade. But it was also seen by many as a last-minute act of corporate meddling, a final stamp from the Colonel's world on a song born in the creative freedom of Memphis. Despite the fight, the greed, and the bizarre fade-out, Suspicious Minds was released. It went straight to number one. It was Elvis's last chart topper in his lifetime. It was a triumph of his own artistic instinct over his manager's business-first approach. But it almost never happened. The master tapes almost stayed in that vault forever, all because the Colonel wanted a bigger piece of the pie. Number 16, did the Colonel want a Christmas song instead of If I Can Dream? Yes, he did. Colonel Parker's vision for Elvis Presley's 1968 television special was a simple, profitable holiday show. He imagined Elvis in a tuxedo, surrounded by Christmas trees, singing a dozen holiday standards. The sponsor, Singer Sewing Machines, loved the idea. It was safe, it was commercial, it was exactly what you would expect, and it would have been the final nail in the coffin of Elvis's career. By 1968, Elvis was a joke to the serious music world. He was the star of a string of terrible movies with even worse soundtracks. He hadn't performed live in front of an audience in 7 years. Rock and roll had moved on. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, they were making music that mattered. And Elvis was singing about clam bakes and puppet shows. The TV special was his last chance. The young director Steve Binder knew this. Binder, who had never even listened to an Elvis record before he got the job, saw something in Elvis that the Colonel didn't. He saw a charismatic, dangerous performer trapped inside a Hollywood caricature. Binder's idea was to strip away the movies, the silly songs, and the Colonel's control. He wanted to put Elvis back in black leather, give him a guitar, and let him play the music that made him famous. The heart of the show was an intimate, in-the-round performance that felt more like a jam session than a slick TV production. You know, it was raw, exciting, and real. But the Colonel still wanted his Christmas song. He insisted the show end with Elvis singing, "Here Comes Santa Claus," or "I'll Be Home for Christmas." Binder was horrified. It would undermine everything they were trying to do. The show was about Elvis reclaiming his legacy, not becoming a holiday novelty act. The conflict came to a head in the final days of production. The country was in turmoil. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in April. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in June, just weeks before the special was taped. The nation was reeling. And Binder and the show's musical director, Walter Earl Brown, felt that the show needed to say something about the state of the world. They wanted to end with a song of hope and unity. They stayed up all night in their office on the Sunset Strip and wrote a song specifically for Elvis. It was called "If I Can Dream." The lyrics quoted Dr. King directly. It was a passionate plea for peace and understanding. The next day they played it for Elvis. Elvis listened intently. When the song was over, he stood up and said, "I'll do it. I'll never sing another song I don't believe in." When Colonel Parker found out, he was livid. A message song? A political song? This was not part of the deal. He confronted Steve Binder in his trailer. The argument was heated. The Colonel said, "This is not an Elvis Presley show." Binder fired back. Then you can get another director. The standoff was real. The entire production hung in the balance. But this time, Elvis stood up to the Colonel. He chose the artist's path, not the manager's. He backed his director. He wanted to sing the song. The performance itself was legendary. Dressed in a white suit, standing alone on a stage, Elvis sang with a passion and fury he hadn't shown in years. His fists were clenched, sweat poured down his face. He wasn't just singing the words, he was living them. It was the most powerful and important performance of his career. It transformed him from a fading movie star back into a vital, relevant artist. And it almost didn't happen. If the Colonel had gotten his way, the show that saved Elvis's career would have ended with a jingle about Santa Claus. Number 15, why did two of rock's greatest songwriters have to fight Elvis's manager? Lieber and Stoller were not just songwriters, they were architects of early rock and roll. Jerry Lieber wrote the words, and Mike Stoller wrote the music. They wrote Hound Dog. They wrote Jailhouse Rock, King Creole, Treat Me Nice, and Don't. They understood Elvis's voice and his attitude better than anyone. But working with Elvis meant working with Colonel Tom Parker. And Parker had one rule that was more important than any melody or lyric: he had to get paid. Parker's business model was simple. He insisted that any songwriter who wanted Elvis to record their song had to sign a special contract. This contract gave Elvis's publishing companies, Hill and Range, a significant portion of the royalties. Usually it was a third, sometimes more. For unknown writers, this was a tough but acceptable price to pay for having the biggest star in the world sing their song. But Lieber and Stoller were not unknown writers. They were hit makers. They had their own publishing company. They were used to getting 100% of their royalties. When they first met the Colonel, he presented them with his standard contract. They refused to sign it. They told him they didn't give away their publishing rights to anyone. The Colonel was not used to being told no. He couldn't understand why these two young men would turn down a chance to work with Elvis Presley, but Lieber and Stoller stood their ground. A tense negotiation followed. The Colonel wanted his cut. Lieber and Stoller wanted their artistic and financial independence. Finally, a unique deal was struck. Lieber and Stoller would form a new publishing company in partnership with Elvis and his publisher, Gene Averback. This way they could maintain control over their work while still giving the Colonel's camp a piece of the action. It was a compromise, but it was one that allowed them to work together. The relationship, however, was always strained. The Colonel saw them as hired help. They saw themselves as creative partners. This clash came to a head during the making of the movie Jailhouse Rock. Lieber and Stoller were hired to write the entire soundtrack. They were excited. They saw it as an opportunity to create a real rock and roll musical. They moved to New York and set up an office to work on the project, but the Colonel treated them poorly. On one occasion, he barged into their hotel room while Mike Stoller was with a woman and demanded they play him the songs they'd written. Stoller, flustered, played a half-finished melody. The Colonel listened and then started arguing with him about money. Stoller was so angry that he threw a chair across the room. The Colonel, unfazed, simply picked up the chair and continued the negotiation. The breaking point came in 1958. Lieber and Stoller had written a string of hits for Elvis and were working on the soundtrack for his next movie, King Creole. They had a strong working relationship with Elvis himself. Elvis respected them and trusted their musical judgment. They would often work late into the night at the studio, experimenting with different sounds and arrangements. The Colonel didn't like this. He didn't like anyone having that much influence over his star. One day, out of the blue, the Colonel's right-hand man, Tom Diskin, handed Jerry Lieber a blank contract. He told him to sign it. Lieber asked what it was for. Diskin wouldn't say. He just said, "Sign it." Lieber refused. The contract was a loyalty oath, a document that would have essentially given Parker complete control over their future work with Elvis. That was the end. Lieber and Stoller packed their bags and left. They never wrote another song for Elvis Presley. The Colonel's obsession with control and his relentless pursuit of every last dollar drove away the most successful and creatively compatible songwriters Elvis ever had. After they left, the quality of the songs Elvis recorded took a noticeable dive. He was forced to rely on a stable of staff writers who were willing to give up their publishing rights. The result was a decade of bland, formulaic movie soundtracks. The Colonel had won the battle for control, but in doing so, he had crippled his own client's artistic growth. Number 14 was Heartbreak Hotel, too strange for a debut single. It was dark, it was moody, it was unlike anything else on the radio in 1956. The song Heartbreak Hotel was built around a sparse, echoing arrangement. The lyrics spoke of a lonely place at the end of a lonely street, where broken-hearted lovers go to die. It was more of a blues dirge than a rock and roll anthem. And it was the very first song Elvis Presley recorded for his new label, RCA Records. The executives at RCA were horrified. They had just paid an unprecedented $40,000 to buy Elvis's contract from Sun Records. They were expecting upbeat, commercial, rockabilly hits like That's All Right and Mystery Train. They were expecting a sure thing. Instead, Elvis walked into the studio in Nashville on January 10th, 1956, and delivered this. The song was written by Mae Boren Axton, a high school teacher and part-time songwriter, and Tommy Durden. The inspiration was a newspaper article about a man who had died by suicide, leaving behind a note that simply said, "I walk a lonely street." When Elvis heard the demo, he knew he had to record it. He felt the song's darkness and despair. It resonated with him. His producer at RCA, Steve Scholes, was not so sure. He thought the song was a downer. He couldn't imagine teenagers dancing to it. The sound was also a problem. Guitarist Scotty Moore's solo was raw and biting. Bassist Bill Black's part was heavy and ominous. DJ Fontana's drumming was simple and stark. The recording had a huge amount of natural echo, created by placing a speaker at one end of a long hallway and a microphone at the other. It sounded cavernous and ghostly. Colonel Parker was also skeptical. His primary concern was commercial appeal. Would this song sell records? Would it make money? It was a risk. It didn't sound like anything else on the pop charts. It was too weird, too morbid. The pressure was on to record something more conventional. RCA and the Colonel pushed for other, safer songs during the session. But Elvis was stubborn. He believed in Heartbreak Hotel. He fought for it. He insisted that it be his first single for the new label. Reluctantly, RCA agreed. They released the single on January 27th, 1956. For the first few weeks, it looked like the executives had been right. The song struggled to find an audience. Radio stations were hesitant to play it. It didn't fit into any neat category. It wasn't pop, it wasn't country, it wasn't rhythm and blues, it was something new and unsettling. But then Elvis started performing the song on television, on shows like Stage Show, hosted by Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, and The Milton Berle Show. People saw him perform it. They saw the intensity, the raw emotion, the famous sneer, the shaking legs. The performance was electric. It was dangerous, and it connected with a generation of young people who were tired of the bland, wholesome pop music of the day. The record started to climb the charts. It hit number 1 on the Billboard Top 100 chart in April and stayed there for 7 weeks. It also went to number 1 on the country chart and number 5 on the R&B chart. It was a massive crossover hit. It sold over 1 million copies, becoming Elvis's first gold record. It proved that Elvis's instincts were right. It also taught Colonel Parker a valuable lesson. Elvis had a unique connection with his audience. He knew what they wanted, often better than the record executives or even his own manager. While Parker's main goal was to minimize risk, Heartbreak Hotel showed that sometimes the biggest risk was the one worth taking. The song that almost got shelved because it was too strange became the song that launched the career of the biggest star in the world. Number 13, did Elvis have to give up half a song for Love Me Tender? He didn't just give up half the song. He was given a song that was already half someone else's. The year was 1956. Elvis was making his first movie, a Western originally titled The Reno Brothers. Colonel Parker saw movies as the next logical step in building the Elvis brand. It was a way to sell more records, reach a wider audience, and make a lot more money. The Colonel, however, had a very specific way of doing business. He insisted that any movie Elvis made had to feature him singing, and any song he sang had to be published by his company. This created a problem. The original script for The Reno Brothers was a serious drama. There was no place for Elvis to burst into song. The producer, Hal Wallace, didn't want Elvis to sing in the movie at all. He wanted to establish him as a serious actor. But the Colonel was adamant. No songs, no Elvis. A compromise was reached. They would add 4 songs to the movie. And to placate the Colonel, they changed the title of the film to Love Me Tender, the title of the main ballad. The song Love Me Tender itself was a perfect example of the Colonel's business savvy and his disregard for artistic originality. The melody was not new. It was the melody of a Civil War-era folk song called Ora Lee, which was in the public domain. This meant that anyone could use it for free. The Colonel's publishing company, Hill and Range, hired a songwriter named Ken Darby to write new lyrics to the old tune. Darby did his job crafting the simple romantic words that would become famous, but when it came time to assign the songwriting credit, a new name was added, Elvis Presley. And Elvis had not written a word of the lyrics or a note of the music, so why was he listed as a co-writer? The answer was simple money. By adding Elvis's name to the credits, the Colonel ensured that Elvis, and by extension the Colonel himself, would receive a share of the songwriter's royalties in addition to the publishing royalties. This was a common practice for Parker. He did it on several songs throughout Elvis's career. It was a way to double dip to maximize profits from every single recording. Ken Darby was reportedly not happy about sharing his credit, but he had little choice. He later explained that he let his wife, Vera Mattson, be listed as the co-writer alongside Elvis because he didn't want his own name associated with the deal. So the official credit reads Presley Mattson. Elvis himself was uncomfortable with this arrangement. He knew he hadn't written the song. He told people, "I never wrote a song in my life," but he was young and trusted his manager. He went along with the plan. The song was a massive hit. It was released in September 1956 before the movie came out, and it went to #1 on the charts. It received over 1 million advance orders, a first in the recording industry. It helped make the movie a box office success. From a purely business perspective, the Colonel's strategy was a brilliant success. He had taken a public domain melody, commissioned new lyrics, claimed a piece of the writing credit, and created a smash hit that promoted a successful movie. But it set a dangerous precedent. It established a pattern of prioritizing profit over artistry. It was the beginning of a long process where the music became secondary to the marketing plan. The beautiful, simple ballad, Love Me Tender, was in reality a carefully constructed commercial product built on a borrowed tune and a phantom songwriter credit. Number 12, why was Can't Help Falling in Love almost cut from its movie? It is one of the most beloved ballads of all time, a staple at weddings and anniversaries. But when the producers of the movie Blue Hawaii first heard Can't Help Falling in Love, they wanted it thrown out. They thought it was clumsy and boring. The year was 1961. Elvis was deep into his movie career. The formula was set: exotic location, a few fight scenes, a dozen forgettable songs, and Elvis gets the girl in the end. Blue Hawaii was the quintessential example of this formula. The soundtrack was filled with light, breezy, Hawaiian-themed pop songs. But the songwriting team of Hugo Peretti, Luigi Creatore, and George David Weiss was tasked with writing a key ballad for the film. They were given a specific piece of music to work with as inspiration, a French classical piece from the 18th century called Plaisir d'amour. They took the melody and wrote new English lyrics, creating the song we know today. When they played their demo for the movie's producers and the music publishers from Hill and Range, the reaction was not good. The publishers thought the melody was too complex, and the title, Can't Help Falling in Love, was too long and awkward. The movie producers agreed. They felt the song was too slow and serious. It didn't fit with the light, escapist tone of the rest of the movie. They wanted it cut. But there was one person who loved the song, Elvis. He heard the demo and immediately connected with it. He thought it was beautiful. He fought to keep it in the movie. He recorded it at radio recorders in Hollywood in March 1961. His performance was tender and sincere. He sang it with a gentle, restrained passion that was perfect for the lyrics. He knew he had a classic on his hands because Elvis was the star. His opinion, carried a lot of weight. Despite their reservations, the producers and publishers agreed to keep the song in the film. It was used in a scene where Elvis's character, Chad Gates, gives a music box to his girlfriend's grandmother. Even after the movie was finished, there was still debate about whether to release the song as a single. The record label RCA was pushing for a more upbeat rock and roll song from the soundtrack called Rockahula Baby to be the A-side. They thought Can't Help Falling in Love was too much of a risk. It was a ballad, and rock and roll was king. But again, Elvis and his team pushed back. They believed in the song. A compromise was reached. They released a double A-sided single with Rockahula Baby on one side and Can't Help Falling in Love on the other. This allowed radio DJs to choose which song they wanted to play. The public made the choice for them. Can't Help Falling in Love became the bigger hit. It went to #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in the US and #1 in the UK. Over the years, it has become one of Elvis's most enduring and iconic songs. He ended nearly every one of his live concerts in the 1970s with it. The song that the experts dismissed as clumsy and boring turned out to be a timeless classic. It was another example of Elvis's own artistic instincts proving to be far more accurate than those of the businessmen who surrounded him. The Colonel's focus was on the Blue Hawaii package. As a whole, a successful movie and a a top-selling soundtrack album. The fate of one individual song was less important to him than the overall commercial performance. It was Elvis's personal belief in the song that saved it from being left on the cutting room floor. Number 11 was In the Ghetto, too controversial for Elvis. Colonel Parker certainly thought so. In 1969, a message song was the last thing he wanted his client to record. The Colonel's philosophy was to avoid controversy at all costs. Politics, social commentary, religion, and theft. These were topics that could alienate part of the audience. And alienating the audience was bad for business. Elvis was a universal brand meant to be loved by everyone, from teenagers in Memphis to grandmothers in Middle America. A song about poverty, crime, and the cyclical nature of despair in an inner-city slum was not part of the marketing plan. The song was written by a young songwriter named Mac Davis. It was originally titled The Vicious Circle. It told the story of a boy born into poverty in a Chicago ghetto who grows up hungry, turns to crime, and is eventually killed just as his own son is born into the same desperate circumstances. It was a powerful and bleak piece of social commentary. Davis pitched the song to Sammy Davis Jr., but he was also working with Freddie Bienstock, the head of Elvis's publishing company. Bienstock heard the song and thought it might be something special for Elvis. This was during the legendary American Sound Studio sessions in Memphis, the same sessions that produced Suspicious Minds. I think Elvis was on a creative high. He was tired of the bland movie songs and was looking for material with substance. When he heard In the Ghetto, he was immediately drawn to it. He understood the story. He had grown up poor in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later in a public housing project in Memphis. He knew what it was like to go without. He felt a deep connection to the song's message. But when he told the Colonel and his entourage that he wanted to record it, they pushed back. They're hard. They told him it was a protest song. They said it was too political. They warned him that recording it would damage his image. They argued that his fans in the South would be offended. They told him it was a career killer. The pressure was intense. For a moment, Elvis wavered. He told the producer, Chip Smoman, that maybe they shouldn't do it. But the musicians and producers in the studio encouraged him. They told him it was an important song and that he was the perfect person to sing it. Elvis decided to go with his gut. He recorded the song. His vocal performance was one of the most sensitive and empathetic of his career. He didn't oversing it. He delivered the story with a sense of quiet sadness and resignation. He became the narrator, a mournful observer of a tragedy that he knew was all too real. After the song was recorded, the fight continued. The Colonel and RCA were still hesitant to release it. They were afraid of the backlash, but once again, Elvis insisted. He believed in the song and its message. He was no longer the young kid who would do whatever his manager told him. He was a 34-year-old man who wanted his music to have meaning. In the Ghetto was released as a single in April 1969. It was a massive international hit. It went to number 3 on the charts in the US. More importantly, it showed a new side of Elvis Presley. It showed him as a mature artist who was willing to take risks and engage with the world around him. It earned him a new level of respect from critics and a new generation of fans. The Colonel's fears turned out to be completely unfounded. The song didn't damage Elvis's career, it enhanced it. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the most commercially successful move is to forget about commerce and just make great art. Number 10. Did Jerry Reed really have to show Elvis how to play guitar? Not exactly, but Elvis did have to fight to get Jerry Reed, a master guitarist and songwriter, into the studio in the first place. The story of the song Guitar Man is the story of Elvis breaking free from a creative prison. By 1967, the Nashville recording scene had become a rigid, formulaic process for Elvis. The Colonel and RCA liked to use a regular group of session musicians known as the Nashville A-Team. They were brilliant players, but the sessions had become predictable. They would churn out 3 songs in a 3-hour session, usually for another terrible movie soundtrack. The creativity was gone. Elvis was bored and depressed. He would later refer to this period as the Stone Age of my career. He was scheduled for a recording session in Nashville in September 1967. The songs chosen for him were the usual uninspired fare. But then Elvis heard a record by a country artist named Jerry Reed. The song was Guitar Man. It was a funky, swampy, blues-infused track with a distinctive and incredibly complex fingerstyle guitar part. Elvis loved it. He wanted to record it. He went into RCA Studio B in Nashville with the A-Team and tried to cut the track, but they couldn't get it right. No one could replicate Jerry Reed's unique guitar style. The feel was wrong. The groove wasn't there. After hours of frustration, Elvis gave up. He told his producer, Felton Jarvis, "Get me Jerry Reed." This was a major breach of protocol. The Colonel and RCA had their system. They used their musicians. Bringing in an outsider, especially a distinctive artist like Jerry Reed, was not how things were done. It disrupted the assembly line. But Elvis was insistent. He wasn't going to record the song unless he had the man who wrote it and played it on the record. Felton Jarvis made the call. He tracked down Jerry Reed, who was out fishing. Reed couldn't believe it. Elvis Presley wanted him to play on his record. He rushed to the studio. When Reed walked in, the atmosphere changed. Elvis was excited. He and Reed hit it off. Immediately, Reed showed Elvis and the other musicians the licks and the rhythm. He brought an energy and authenticity to the session that had been missing for years. They recorded Guitar Man, and it sounded incredible. Elvis was so inspired that he asked Reed if he had any other songs. Reed played him another one called U.S. Mail. It was a tough, swaggering, tongue-in-cheek song. Elvis loved it too. They cut it on the spot. For the first time in a long time, Elvis was genuinely happy in the studio. He was collaborating with other musicians, not just singing to a prearranged track. He was making music that excited him. The Colonel was not pleased. This was not efficient. It was not predictable. It was not how he liked to do business. He saw it as Elvis indulging himself, wasting time and money. But the results spoke for themselves. Guitar Man and U.S. Mail were two of the best songs Elvis had recorded in years. They were a brief glimpse of the artist he could be when he was freed from the constraints of the Hollywood movie machine. The session was a small rebellion, but an important one. It was Elvis taking back control of his own music, even if it was just for one night. It was a sign of the creative rebirth that was to come with the '68 special and the Memphis sessions. Number 9. Why did Elvis record a song he didn't even like? The song was Burning Love. It was a high-energy, full-throttle rocker that became Elvis's last major hit single. And he initially had no interest in recording it. It was 1972. Elvis was deep into his Las Vegas jumpsuit era. His live shows were legendary, but his recording career was faltering. His last few singles had failed to make a significant impact on the charts. He was in a creative rut, often recording ballads and gospel songs that he was passionate about, but which had limited commercial appeal. The RCA and the Colonel were desperate for a hit. The song Burning Love was written by Dennis Linde. It had been recorded by a few other artists without much success. Elvis's music publisher, Freddie Bienstock, brought the song to him during a recording session at RCA's Hollywood studio. Elvis listened to the demo and was not impressed. He thought it was a simple, repetitive rock song. It didn't have the emotional depth or complexity of the ballads and gospel songs he preferred to sing at the time. He didn't want to do it. But the Colonel and RCA producer Felton Jarvis pushed him. They knew it had the potential to be a hit. It was upbeat, catchy, and perfect for the radio. It was exactly the kind of commercial song they needed to get Elvis back on the charts. The session for Burning Love was reportedly a tense one. Elvis was not in a good mood. He went through the motions, singing the song with little enthusiasm. He saw it as a throwaway track, a commercial obligation he had to fulfill before he could get to the music he really cared about. After a few takes, he felt he had done enough. He left the studio, leaving Jarvis and the musicians to finish the track. The musicians, led by guitarist James Burton, kept working on it. They knew they had a great rock and roll song on their hands. They laid down a powerful, driving, instrumental track. When Elvis's vocal was added, the combination was explosive. Even though Elvis may have been unenthusiastic during the recording, his natural talent and charisma shone through. His voice soared over the powerful rhythm section. It was a classic Elvis performance, even if his heart wasn't fully in it. RCA released Burning Love as a single in August 1972. It was an immediate smash. It shot up the charts, reaching #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became a highlight of his live shows, a crowd-pleasing rocker that always brought the house down. It was exactly the hit that the Colonel and RCA had wanted. It was a classic case of the commercial machine getting it right. The Colonel's focus was not on whether Elvis liked the song, but on whether the public would buy it. In this instance, his commercial instincts were correct, but the story highlights a recurring problem in Elvis's later career. He was often forced to record songs he didn't connect with, simply to satisfy the demands of his record label and his manager. He was a hit-making machine, and the machine had to be fed. Burning Love was a great record, but it was born out of commercial pressure, not artistic passion. At #8 was a forgotten movie song, the key to a global hit. Yes, but it took 35 years and a remix for it to happen. The song was A Little Less Conversation. The original version was recorded in 1968 for the movie Live a Little, Love a Little. It was a funky, brass-heavy track that was relegated to a B-side and largely forgotten. It was a perfect example of a good song getting lost in the shuffle of Elvis's declining movie career. The Colonel's strategy in the late 1960s was to maximize the output of movie-related products. This meant an endless stream of soundtrack albums and singles, often with little regard for quality control. Good songs were thrown away on bad movies, and their potential was never realized. A Little Less Conversation was one of those songs. It was sharp, witty, and had a great groove, but in the context of a mediocre movie, it made little impact. It was just another track on another soundtrack album. For decades, it remained a deep cut, known only to die-hard Elvis fans. The Colonel's business model was focused on the immediate return. A song's value was determined by its performance on the charts in the year it was released. There was no long-term vision for managing Elvis's back catalog. Once a song had served its purpose of promoting a movie, it was largely forgotten. Then, in 2002, something unexpected happened. A Dutch DJ named Tom Holkenborg, also known as JXL, was asked to remix the song for a Nike commercial that was set to air during the World Cup. Holkenborg took the original vocal track, stripped away the 1960s production, and built a brand new, high-energy electronic dance track around it. The result was electrifying. It was modern, powerful, and incredibly catchy. The remix took Elvis's classic vocal performance and placed it in a completely new context, introducing it to a new generation of listeners. The song was released as a single, credited to Elvis vs. JXL. It became a global phenomenon. It went to #1 in over 20 countries, including the United Kingdom, where it helped to posthumously give Elvis more #1 hits than the Beatles. The success of the remix was a powerful illustration of what the Colonel had so often missed: the timeless quality of Elvis's voice. Parker saw the songs as disposable products tied to specific movies or albums. He failed to understand that the recordings themselves were valuable assets that could be reimagined and recontextualized for future generations. The story of A Little Less Conversation is a story of a song being saved from the commercial assembly line that almost buried it. It was a great performance that was wasted on a forgettable movie, a victim of the quantity over quality approach that defined Elvis's late 60s career. Its revival as a global dance hit was a happy accident, a result of a creative vision that looked beyond the original, limited context in which the song was created. It was a reminder that even when the business decisions were poor, the power of Elvis's performance could endure. #7. How did a novelty song become a Las Vegas anthem? The song Viva Las Vegas is now synonymous with the city it celebrates. It's an anthem of fun, excitement, and high-stakes glamour. But it started life as just another movie title song, cranked out to promote another formulaic Elvis film. And it was almost overshadowed by a duet with his co-star, Anne Margaret. The 1964 movie Viva Las Vegas is arguably one of the best of Elvis's post-Army films, largely due to the incredible chemistry between him and Anne Margaret. They were a dynamic and explosive pair on screen, The studio MGM wanted to capitalize on this. They planned for a soundtrack album that would feature several duets between the two stars. Colonel Parker hated this idea. He saw Anne Margaret as a threat. She was a rising star with a powerful screen presence. The Colonel was fiercely protective of the Elvis brand. He did not want his star to be upstaged or have to share the spotlight with anyone, especially not a vibrant female co-star who was getting just as much media attention as Elvis. The Colonel's rule was simple. Elvis was the star, period. Anyone else was just a supporting player. He vetoed the idea of a duet album. He also reportedly worked behind the scenes to limit the amount of screen time and publicity that Anne Margaret received. As a result of this conflict, a full soundtrack album for Viva Las Vegas was never released at the time. Instead, a short 4-song EP was put out. The title track, Viva Las Vegas, was the lead song, but it was not initially a major hit. It only reached number 29 on the Billboard charts. The lack of a full album and the internal politics surrounding Anne Margaret meant that the song didn't get the promotional push it might have otherwise. It was treated as just another piece of movie merchandise. The song itself was written by the legendary songwriting duo Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann. They were professionals who knew how to write a hit, but the pressure of the movie soundtrack machine often led to rushed work. The recording session for Viva Las Vegas was a prime example. Elvis and the musicians reportedly recorded 10 songs in a single 12-hour session. There was little time for creativity or refinement. It was about getting the job done as quickly and cheaply as possible. This was the Colonel's way. Maximize the output, minimize the cost. Despite the rushed recording and the backstage drama, the song itself was a classic. Elvis's performance was full of energy and excitement. He perfectly captured the high-octane spirit of the city. But for years, the song was just another mid-level chart entry from a mostly forgotten movie. It was only over time, as Las Vegas itself grew into a global entertainment capital, that the song took on a new life. It was adopted by the city as its unofficial anthem. It became a cultural touchstone used in countless movies, TV shows, and advertisements. The Colonel's short-sighted business decisions almost buried it. His jealousy over Anne Margaret prevented a proper soundtrack release that could have made the song a bigger hit at the time. His focus on a high-volume, low-cost recording process treated the song as a disposable product. He saw it as a tool to sell a movie in 1964, not as a lasting piece of music. The song's eventual iconic status happened in spite of the way it was originally handled, a testament to the enduring power of the performance itself. Number 6 was a famous arrangement, a ripoff. The song was an American trilogy. It became a grandiose, show-stopping centerpiece of Elvis's live concerts in the 1970s. But the arrangement that made it famous was not created for Elvis, and Colonel Parker's attempt to claim ownership of it was a classic example of his business ethics. An American trilogy is not a single song, but a medley of 3 19th century folk songs: Dixie, a Confederate anthem, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a Union anthem, and All My Trials, an African-American spiritual. The genius of the medley is in how it combines these 3 disparate and historically conflicting pieces of music into a single, powerful statement of American unity and reconciliation. But Elvis was not the first person to perform this medley. It was arranged and popularized by a country soul singer named Mickey Newbury. Newbury recorded his version in 1971, and it was a minor hit. Elvis heard Newbury's record and loved the arrangement. He decided he wanted to perform it in his live show. He recorded his version in 1972. His performance was spectacular. It was operatic in its scope and emotion. It was the perfect vehicle for his powerful voice and charismatic stage presence. It quickly became a fan favorite. The problem arose, as it so often did, when it came to the business side of things. Colonel Parker and his publishing company, Hill and Range, saw an opportunity. All 3 of the original songs in the medley were in the public domain. This meant there were no royalties to be paid to the original composers. However, Mickey Newbury had created a new, unique musical arrangement of these public domain songs. Under copyright law, a new arrangement of a public domain work is entitled to its own copyright protection. Newberry was the legal author of the arrangement, but the Colonel didn't see it that way. He told Mickey Newberry that in order for Elvis to continue performing the song, Newberry would have to give up a portion of his publishing rights to the arrangement. In other words, the Colonel wanted a cut of the money for an arrangement that someone else had created. This was a common tactic for Parker. He viewed any song Elvis performed as a property that he should have a financial stake in. Newberry, to his credit, refused. He told the Colonel that he was the writer of the arrangement and he would not be giving away his publishing rights. The Colonel was faced with a choice. He could advise Elvis to stop performing the song, thus depriving the live show of one of its most powerful moments. Or he could back down and allow Newberry to keep his rightful publishing royalties. For once, the music won. Elvis loved singing the song too much. It was too important to the show. The Colonel relented, and Newberry retained his full publishing rights. But the incident was telling. It showed that the Colonel's desire to control and profit from every aspect of Elvis's career extended even to claiming ownership of other artists' creative work. He saw music not as art, but as a series of assets to be acquired and monetized by any means necessary. Number 5, why was the long version of a sad song released? The song was Are You Lonesome Tonight? It was a sentimental spoken word ballad that was originally written in 1926. And Elvis recorded it in 1960 at the personal request of Colonel Parker. It was one of the Colonel's wife's favorite songs. Elvis was not particularly enthusiastic about it. He thought it was old-fashioned and corny, but he recorded it as a favor. His version, with its dramatic spoken word bridge, became a massive #1 hit. It was a perfect example of the kind of safe, middle-of-the-road pop that the Colonel wanted Elvis to record after he returned from the Army. For years, Elvis performed the song faithfully in his live shows. But on August 26, 1969, during a performance at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, something went wrong. Or, depending on your perspective, something went right. As Elvis began the famous spoken word section, I Wonder If You're Lonesome Tonight, he saw a bald man in the front row take off his toupee and start polishing his head with it. The sight was so absurd that Elvis started to giggle. He tried to compose himself and continue with the dramatic monologue, but he couldn't. He kept breaking into fits of laughter. The more he tried to be serious, the funnier it became. He changed the line to "You gaze at your doorstep and picture me there," to "You gaze at your bald head and wish you had hair." The audience roared with laughter. The performance completely fell apart in a beautiful, spontaneous moment of shared humor. The concert was being recorded for a live album. When the producers at RCA listened back to the tapes, they had a decision to make. This version of the song was obviously unusable for a serious live album. It was a mistake, a botched take. But it was also a uniquely charming and human moment. It captured a side of Elvis that the public rarely saw, the playful, goofy man who didn't take himself too seriously. For years, the tape of the long version was passed around among collectors as a popular bootleg. And then in 1980, 3 years after Elvis's death, RCA and the Colonel decided to officially release it as a single. On the surface, this seems like a strange decision. Why release a version of a song where the star is laughing so hard he can't sing the words? The answer is pure Colonel Parker. He recognized that the story of the laughing version had become a part of the Elvis legend. He knew that fans would be curious to hear it. He saw it not as a mistake, but as a novelty product that could be sold. It was a way to monetize a piece of Elvis's history, even an imperfect one. The release was a commercial success. The single became a top 25 hit in the UK. It was a testament to the Colonel's ability to turn anything related to Elvis into a marketable commodity. But it also highlights the strange and often contradictory nature of the Colonel's management. The original song was a product of his conservative commercial instincts. He pushed Elvis to record a safe, sentimental ballad. The laughing version was the opposite. It was a moment of pure, unplanned chaos. And yet, the Colonel found a way to package and sell that chaos as well. It showed that for Parker, the content of the music was secondary. Whether it was a serious ballad or a botched take, if it had Elvis's name on it, it was a product to be sold. Number 4. Did an Otis Blackwell song come with a price? And Otis Blackwell was a brilliant African-American songwriter who penned some of the most important songs in early rock and roll. He wrote Great Balls of Fire for Jerry Lee Lewis. He wrote Fever for Little Willie John, later made famous by Peggy Lee. And for Elvis Presley, he wrote Don't Be Cruel and All Shook Up. These were not just songs, they were cultural events. But writing a song for Elvis came with a condition, and that condition was dictated by Colonel Parker. The condition was that Otis Blackwell had to agree to share the songwriting credit with Elvis Presley. Blackwell, like Elvis, knew that Elvis had nothing to do with writing the songs. The story goes that Blackwell never even met Elvis. He would write the songs and record a demo, singing in a style that he thought would suit Elvis's voice. He would then sell the songs to Elvis's publishing company, Hill and Range. The deal was straightforward. If he wanted Elvis to record the song, he had to give up 50% of the songwriter's royalties. The credit would read Blackwell Presley. Why did he agree to this? For a black songwriter in the 1950s, the music industry was a difficult and often unfair business. Blackwell knew that having his songs recorded by the biggest star in the world would be life-changing, even if he only received half of the royalties. Half of the royalties from a massive Elvis hit was a lot more money than 100% of the royalties from a song that nobody ever heard. So, he made the deal. Don't Be Cruel was released in 1956 as the B-side to Hound Dog. It was a phenomenal success, a double-sided single where both sides went to number 1. It became one of the biggest selling singles of all time. All Shook Up, released a year later, was another number 1 hit. The arrangement was incredibly lucrative for Elvis and the Colonel. They were collecting a songwriter's share on songs they had no hand in creating. For Otis Blackwell, it was a bittersweet success. He was proud of the songs and happy with the financial rewards, but he was also a creator who had been forced to give away half the credit for his own work. He was a professional, and he understood it was the price of doing business in that era. Like, this practice was not unique to Elvis, but the Colonel pursued it with a particular zeal. It was a core part of his strategy to maximize revenue. He saw songwriting royalties as another income stream to be controlled. This business-first approach had a significant long-term impact on the quality of Elvis's music. While a professional like Otis Blackwell was willing to make the deal, other established songwriters like Leiber and Stoller were not. As Elvis's career went on, he became more and more reliant on a stable of staff writers who were willing to play by the Colonel's rules. This led to a decline in the quality and originality of the material he was offered. The deal that made Don't Be Cruel a hit also created a system that would later trap Elvis in a creative cage, forced to sing songs that were written to fit a business model, not an artistic vision. Number 3 was Elvis's first movie role, a silent one. No, but his manager almost silenced his music in it. When Elvis Presley was cast in his first film, Love Me Tender, the original plan was for him to have a straight dramatic role. The producer, Hal Wallace, wanted to launch Elvis as a serious actor in the mold of James Dean or Marlon Brando. The script was a drama set in the aftermath of the Civil War. Elvis played Clint Reno, the youngest of 4 brothers. It was a supporting role, and there were no songs in the original screenplay. Colonel Parker had other ideas. He had just signed a multi-picture deal for his client, and he saw the movies as a powerful new marketing tool. For the Colonel, an Elvis movie without Elvis singing was a wasted opportunity. How could you use the movie to sell records if there were no new songs in it? The Colonel's logic was simple. Movies sell soundtracks, and soundtracks sell movies. The two were inextricably linked in his business plan. He went to war with the studio. He insisted that the movie had to include musical numbers. The producers and the director, Robert D. Webb, were against the idea. They felt that having the character suddenly burst into a 1950s style rock and roll song would be anachronistic and would ruin the dramatic tone of the film. The conflict was intense. The studio wanted an actor. The Colonel wanted a musical star. In the end, as was so often the case, the Colonel got his way. A compromise was reached. They would add 4 songs to the film, but they would be written in a style that was more appropriate to the Civil War setting folk ballads and country-style songs rather than rock and roll. The title of the movie was changed from The Reno Brothers to Love Me Tender to promote the lead ballad. The song Love Me Tender, with its public domain melody and manufactured songwriting credit, was the perfect product of this compromise. It was a beautiful song, but its inclusion in the film was born out of a business dispute, not a creative choice. The other three songs, Poor Boy We're Gonna Move and Let Me See, were also inserted into the narrative. The result was an awkward mix of a serious drama and a light musical. The Colonel's insistence on turning every movie into a musical showcase set the template for Elvis's entire Hollywood career. The focus shifted away from developing his acting talent and towards creating a reliable, repeatable, and profitable movie and soundtrack package. The initial goal of becoming a serious actor was quickly abandoned in favor of the much more lucrative business of being a movie musical star. The decision to force songs into Love Me Tender was a pivotal moment. It was the moment when the Colonel's commercial instincts officially triumphed over any artistic ambitions for Elvis's film career. It ensured that the movies would be a commercial success, but it also guaranteed that they would, with very few exceptions, be creative failures. Number 2, why did a songwriter have to change the word rabbit? The song was Hound Dog. The songwriters were Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. The word they had to change was not rabbit, but the context of the entire song. The original version of Hound Dog was written for a powerful blues singer named Big Mama Thornton. Her version, recorded in 1952, is a slow, grinding, and menacing blues track. In that context, a hound dog is a slang term for a mooching, cheating man. The lyrics are a fierce and defiant message from a woman who is kicking her worthless lover out of the house. It's a raw, adult, and sexually charged song. When Elvis decided to cover Hound Dog in 1956, he wasn't covering Big Mama Thornton's version. He was covering a version he had seen performed in Las Vegas by a group called Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys. Their version was a fast, frantic, novelty version of the song. They had changed the lyrics to be about an actual dog. It was a comedy number. Elvis took their upbeat arrangement and added his own rock and roll swagger to it. His famous television performance on The Milton Berle Show with its suggestive hip swivels caused a national scandal. Critics and conservative groups were outraged. They called his performance vulgar and obscene. The press dubbed him Elvis the Pelvis. The controversy was so intense that on his next major television appearance on The Steve Allen Show, the producers forced him to sing Hound Dog to an actual basset hound while wearing a tuxedo. It was an attempt to neuter his performance, to turn his dangerous rock and roll energy into a safe, family-friendly joke. Colonel Parker was a master of publicity, and he knew how to turn controversy into cash. But he was also a cautious businessman. He wanted to push the envelope, but not so far that it would break. He understood that to make Elvis a mainstream superstar, he had to appeal to a wide audience. He couldn't afford to be seen as too dangerous or too adult. When it came to the official recording of Hound Dog, there was a subtle but important shift. The lyrics remained the same as the Freddie Bell version. You ain't never caught a rabbit, and you ain't no friend of mine. But the performance was pure, defiant rock and roll. The near ruin here was not in a single word, but in the entire handling of the song. The Colonel's instinct was to manage the controversy by sanitizing the performance, as seen on the Steve Allen Show. He was willing to turn one of the most explosive rock and roll songs of all time into a comedy skit to appease the critics and keep the television sponsors happy. It was Elvis's own defiant energy and the raw power of the recording itself that saved the song from becoming a complete novelty. The recorded version of Hound Dog is a masterpiece of rock and roll aggression. It's a sonic explosion. But the story of its performance on television shows the constant pressure from the Colonel and the establishment to water down the very thing that made Elvis so exciting. The battle was over whether Hound Dog was a dangerous blues song, a silly novelty number, or a revolutionary rock and roll anthem. In the end, Elvis made it the latter, but he had to fight against the forces of commercial safety to do it. Number 1, could one bad deal taint an entire legacy? Yes, It wasn't about a single song, it was about all of them. In 1973, Colonel Tom Parker made a business deal that was both brilliant in its short-term gain and devastating in its long-term consequences for Elvis Presley's musical legacy. He sold the rights to Elvis's entire back catalog, every master recording made up to that point to the record label RCA for a lump sum of just over $5 million. This included legendary songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock, Can't Help Falling in Love, and everything in between. Over 700 recordings. Why did he do this? The Colonel was reportedly in deep with gambling debts in Las Vegas. He needed a large infusion of cash, and he needed it quickly. Selling off the master tapes, the most valuable assets Elvis owned, was the fastest way to get it. For Elvis and the Colonel, the deal meant a big payday. They split the money, and it solved their immediate financial problems. But what it also meant was that, from that point forward, Elvis would never again earn a single penny in royalties from the sales of any of the songs he had recorded between 1954 and 1973. Think about that. Every time Hound Dog is played on the radio, every time Suspicious Minds is streamed on Spotify, every time a best of compilation is sold, the money goes to the record label. Elvis's estate receives nothing for those recordings. This was an act of incredible short-sightedness. The Colonel traded a lifetime of perpetual income for a one-time payment. He sold the family jewels to pay for a weekend in Vegas. This deal almost ruined the legacy because it devalued the very core of Elvis's artistry. It treated his life's work as a simple commodity to be sold off to the highest bidder. It prioritized a quick cash grab over the long-term financial security of his client. It was the ultimate expression of the Colonel's philosophy: everything was for sale. There was no sense of history, no concept of a lasting artistic legacy. There was only the deal in front of him. Furthermore, it put Elvis in a desperate position. With no more royalty income from his classic hits, the only way for him to make money from his music was to record new songs and to tour relentlessly. This put immense pressure on him in the final years of his life. He was forced to keep working, to keep churning out new albums even as his health was failing. The quality of the material on his later albums often suffered. The 1973 catalog sale was not just a bad business deal, it was a creative and personal trap. The Colonel's management made Elvis Presley the biggest star in the world. He was a brilliant promoter, a shrewd negotiator, and a master showman. But he was not a custodian of art. He was a manager of a product. This final, massive deal, selling off the golden egg laying goose, was the ultimate proof. He secured a fortune, but in doing so, he signed away a crucial part of Elvis's future, ensuring that the profits from his most iconic work would flow to a corporation, not to the artist who created it or the family he left behind. It was the last and most profound way that the Colonel's business first approach nearly overshadowed the music itself.